Welcome, I'm Claire Shaeffer. Today we are going to examine this Chanel blouse. But first, I want to show you a small part of my couture collection. I started the collection to expand my knowledge of couture techniques. This is the closet for my couture blouses. They are organized more or less by color. I've learned a lot from the garments, but the most important thing I have learned is that most couture techniques are not difficult. And in couture, many of the techniques we already know are simply used in a different way. Here is the Chanel blouse I'm going to examine today. It is a classic design, but it has several interesting details. For my collection, each blouse has a page with a photo, short description, and a number. This blouse is number 1219. It also has a tag with that number pinned to the right sleeve. Before we examine the Chanel, I want to show you a few of my favorites. This is an Yves Saint Laurent blouse. The bias binding at the neck has an interesting detail. I made a short video about this Ungaro camisole earlier. Remember, the covered snaps on it match the fabric. This stunning blouse is a Valentino. It has a beautiful trim on the collar and cuffs, and it has crotch stays. This interesting Dior has two layers. It could be worn as an evening blouse, or it could be worn for day wear. Well, it's time to get started and examine the Chanel. The blouse is from the mid-70s, so it's a little out of date now. Generally, blouses don't have labels when they are part of an ensemble, like a suit, so this blouse was probably ordered separately. Maybe the customer wanted a second blouse, or an alternate blouse, or she outgrew the first one, or it had a food stain. The blouse has a button front opening, long sleeves, and a single layer bias tie at the neck. It also has a built-in camisole of silk fabric. Surprisingly, there are no French seams, even though the fabric is transparent. The bias tie collar is a single layer. It measures 5 inches wide and 59 inches long. The edges of the tie are finished with very small hand-rolled hems. The tie has a single seam on grain beginning near the left shoulder seam. The seam is trimmed to 1/8 inch and overcast by hand. There is a small 2-inch dart on the collar. The dart is also on grain. It begins at the neckline, 1.5 inches from the center front. The right side of the collar is sewn to the wrong side of the blouse at the neckline. The seam is finished with a 3/8 inch or 1 centimeter bias facing. Here you can see the wrong side of the blouse and the right side of the collar. When worn, the collar folds horizontally to cover the seam. This is the wrong side of the blouse front. The left front has a 1 3/16 inch facing. That's an odd measurement until you convert it to centimeters, and it's 3 centimeters. After all, this is a French blouse. The facing edge is overcast by hand. The blouse has a floating band with handmade thread buttonholes and small fabric-covered ball buttons. On the left, you can see the right side of the blouse overlap. On the right, you can see the wrong side. The buttonholes are made through 4 layers with a bar at the top and bottom. They are quite different from a tailored buttonhole. The pattern for the floating band would look like this. On the left, you can see the left front, wrong side up. On the right, you can see it right side up. The blouse has several snaps, which are covered with self fabric, indicating that they were covered before the blouse left the workroom. The underarm seam is 1 inch wide. It has been clipped so it will lie flat. Wide seams are preferred because they press flatter than narrow ones. The clipped edges are rounded, so the corners will not curl up. Notice the white basting wedge, which was not removed. The underarm shields encase purchased dress shields. They were made like a pocket. The sides and bottom of the shields were seamed first and the purchased shield inserted. At the top of the shield, the fabric was folded over and sewn. The shield was lightly tacked to the armscye seam at the top and the side seam at the bottom. Here is the underside of the shield. You can see the top of the camisole and the armscye seam here. The seams on the sleeve and bodice were overcast separately. The camisole is sewn in like a backing. The upper edge of the camisole is finished with very small overcast stitches. There are lingerie guards on the shoulder seam. The sleeves are gathered to a 3-inch band at the wrist. They fasten with fabric-covered ball buttons and thread loops. Look carefully and you can see the remnants of a thread loop and button thread on the cuff. When the cuff is open, you can see the hand-rolled edge between the ends of the cuff. This hand-rolled hem is frequently used on lightweight couture blouses instead of a slash placket. Notice the fabric-covered snap on the cuff. The button loops are made with several strands of thread and covered with blanket stitches. These loops are not very sturdy, so it's easy to see how they might be damaged. The blouse hem is finished with 2 rows of machine stitching and hand overcasting. The workmanship on this simple design is exquisite and interesting. I hope you have enjoyed examining it today. Did you like this blouse, or is it too old-fashioned? I'm Claire Shaeffer. Thank you for joining me today. If you haven't, please join my channel.